turn on the computer, pull up the internet video. See who that is? That is Lord Christopher Monckton. You watch him. You learn from him. You do whatever he does. He's the James Shields of the climate change debate. So as much as selfishly I wanted to have Ted Cruz here, he's doing far better, more important, more impactful things at the moment, and we get the benefit of the James Shields of the global warming debate, Lord Christopher Monckton, 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley. You got it.
Good day, America. My name is Ted Cruz, and I'm running for president. My fellow Americans, it is a great shame that Ted couldn't be with us today. I had the honor to meet him and hear him speak at a very ordinary rubber chicken lunch fundraiser in the back end of Texas somewhere. And he was, if you think that some of those you have heard here today are good speakers, then you must hear Ted Cruz live. I was enormously heartened and not surprised when he got into the Senate. I was thrilled when he said he was going to run for president. And I'm also thrilled that there are so many other, at last, promising Republican candidates who can beat the frankly rather shop-worn and droopy-looking Democrat candidates. Now in this, of course, as a subject of Her Majesty, I am not really permitted to intervene in your politics. However, perhaps one day I shall produce my own birth certificate and offer myself, with all humility, as a candidate for what is arguably the highest office in the world, President of the United States. I wish you all well in the forthcoming campaign, because if the Republicans do win, they are, by now, the best educated major political party in any country on the question of climate change. And you have only to think back a couple of days to the wonderful speeches made by Senator Jim Inhofe and Congressman Lamar Smith. Can we hear a very loud round of applause for those two gentlemen? Now, it would also be right to thank, indeed a pleasure, to thank the wonderful people at the Heartland Institute. Jim Lakely, who has handled the media with his usual skill and imperturbability. He must have learnt that from a Brit somewhere, but he has a better stiff upper lip than most Brits. We have James Taylor, your endlessly charming continuity guy. It's always nice to speak when James Taylor has introduced you because he's so incredibly flattering. Then there's Sam Carnick, there's Nikki Comerford, here she is, the lady of the day. And I'm going to say this very bluntly, Nikki Comerford deserves better than that. Stand up, ladies and gentlemen, and give her a standing ovation. And with, of course, our wonderful team, Keely Drukalis, who came with us to Rome, and my goodness, we tweaked the Pope's tail there quite nicely. Sterling Burnett, Jean Kaprowski, so many others from this great institute, which has stood up against the climate nonsense that is being peddled by a certain narrow-minded political faction, and has said that we here will keep the wishes and intentions and ambitions of your founding fathers for your country alive and well. Now, there is one absentee, a malingerer, who has chosen not to be among us today. And that, of course, is Joe Bast, the president of the Heartland Institute. Now, as you may think, he looks like a cross between Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, particularly in that picture. However, this is the man who is the force behind the Heartland Institute. This is the man whose vision has led to these 10 conferences and has led to the enormously valuable, not so much proselytizing to those who are not here, but the exchange of ideas and information and hard science among those who are here. And that, to me, is almost the greater value of these conferences, so that we can mutually reinforce and reassure each other that we do not stand alone as science collapses around us. So, God bless you, Joe. I am going to ask this conference to come to its feet again. You are too seldom and too inadequately recognized. I want the conference to make the loudest noise it can for Joe Bast, your president. And I do very much hope that Joe was watching that live, but even if he wasn't, he can replay it often at his pleasure. I also want to thank the many, both federal and state legislators and staffers who have honored us with their presence here over the last couple of days and have done us the kindness of hearing our side of the case. God bless you all and the work you do. And one small final thanks as well. You may have noticed some unusually handsome folks standing outside acting as our security guards, keeping out the undesirables that would otherwise have got in, including, if rumor this morning is correct, Michael Mann's lawyer. And I'm very proud to say that all three of them were Her Majesty's subjects, looking after you in the colonies. And one of them was from the Irish Guards, and the other was from the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Can we have a round of applause to thank them for their service? At Paris, this December, bleating representatives of almost 200 nations, the adulatory and sycophantic gaze of the uniformly uninformed and curiously incurious international press, to discuss a supposed problem whose very non-existence has come of age, and to propose supposed solutions that are as damaging to the West as they are unnecessarily to the world, that would not work even if they were necessary, that even if they did work, and even if there were a problem for them to work against, would cost 10 to 100 times more than principled inaction, and that are already destroying, with corruptly profitable and callous ruthlessness, the very natural environment that we are falsely told they are piously intended to preserve. On my estate in Scotland, we used to have a very rare trio, a ménage à trois, 2 male ospreys and a female in the nest. We could look into the nest straight from our bedroom window. And there they were with 2 chicks, a most unusual grouping. We have not seen them for several years, because the blessed glen, where we have our wee bit hill and glen, is now surrounded by hideous windmills. And now, from 2/3 of the Scottish landmass, these expensive and useless and environmentally destructive monstrosities that slice the birds and kill the bats can now be seen. And the cost of these is now so monstrous that our electricity bills in the last 3 years have doubled, purely to pay subsidies to the fat cat landowners who have allowed these ghastly things on their land. And as a result, in a recent cold winter, when for a whole December there was snow on the ground in the whole of the British Isles for the first time since records began, for 1 month, there was no wind, so these windmills did not create any electricity at all, but the cost of subsidizing them, which is paid even when they're not working, is so huge, the cost on electricity bills so great, that there were 7,000 additional excess deaths from cold in that winter. Not so much because the weather was cold, which it was, but because the homes of the people were cold, because they could not afford to pay their electricity bills. So if anybody ever says to you that taking action on climate change is a no-regrets policy, you can tell them it is a many deaths policy. There in Paris, it is their shoddy ambition to establish, under the guileful guise of what they are calling in the treaty draft a governing body, a dismal, supererogatory and permanent global government, a grasping, omnipotent and omnivorous new world order founded on the pretext of the greatest lie ever told, conceived in the scientific ignorance and illiteracy of the classe politique worldwide, nurtured on the pusillanimous fantasy of an incredible children's horror story, fabricated upon the shifting sands of social convenience, political expediency, and above all financial profit, unaffordable to the West, unprofitable to the rest, predatory upon all, administered by few, unaccountable to any, and elected by none. Though the inadvertent delegate from Burma to the 2012 Doha Climate Conference has been excluded for life from attending any event at any UN body, I will be there to stop them. The Treaty of Paris is calculated to set at naught forever all the high hopes and noble ambitions of your founding fathers. The slaveringly eager assent to that treaty by Mr. Obama will, at a shaky stroke of a misguided and leaky biro, make vain the hope of freedom and ensure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall perish from the earth. The profiteers of doom instead will bring us death, slavery, and the pursuit of puritanical misery. The glacial pace of global warming over the past quarter of a century stands in stark and startling contrast not only to the feverish predictions of the computer models that have been so thoroughly and repeatedly discredited by events, but also to the increasingly frenetic mood music by which a narrow, hate-filled, self-serving, but well-funded and powerfully placed political faction seeks to lull the public before, in December, the snake strikes for the last fatal time. Senator Whitehouse, what is it with White Houses and climate change? Senator Whitehouse has demanded the arrest and trial under the RICO statute of those of us who have dared to publish in the learned journals of science reviewed papers casting legitimate doubt upon the party line on climate. Our mortal sin, for which Senator Whitehouse thirsts to punish us by unlimited fines, triple costs and damages, and interminable imprisonment, is that we have, in his inexpert and untutored opinion, put ourselves at odds with what he has with characteristically insouciant mendacity described as the vast majority of peer-reviewed climate science. Well, here I am, Senator. Put the cuffs on. Lead me away. Throw me in the calabozo and drag me to trial. There, in the disciplined forum of the court of law, where the proponents of the climate scam cannot escape debate and cross-examination in the same way as they flee cravenly from it before the court of public opinion, I shall do to Senator Whitehouse what we did to Senator Gore in the High Court in London in 2007, when Her Majesty's then socialist administration proposed to circulate to every school in England his mawkish sci-fi comedy horror movie. The judge, here he is, Mr. Justice Burton, told the world that the Armageddon scenario that he depicts is not based on any scientific view. There, in a single crushing sentence, is the end of the global warming scare. That judge, a former socialist candidate, somebody who wanted to find in favor of Al Gore, on being presented with 80 pages of scientific testimony. The first draft was done by me. It was then knocked into some sort of recognizable scientific shape by Dick Lindzen and our honoree of this afternoon, Robert Carter. The moment the other side saw that testimony, and the extremely long and distinguished resumes of the two great scientists who were willing to put their names to it, they caved in, collapsed, paid us $400,000 in expenses, and agreed that they would not show the film to any innocent schoolchild until they had circulated to every school in England 77 pages of corrective guidance approved by the court. Now, 2 years ago, I had the honor to co-author with Willie Soon, Dave Legates, and Matt Briggs, all of whom I'm delighted to see here today, a paper establishing definitively and beyond all possible challenge, modestly we say this, that the true scientific consensus about whether recent warming was mostly man-made amounted not to 97% of climate papers over the 21 years 1991 to 2011, not to the 95% asserted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climastrology, but to 0.3%. 64 out of 11,944 of these papers that had been marked by climate extremist authors as supporting the consensus, only 64 papers, 0.5% marked by them. We read the 64 papers, only 41 of them, 0.3% of the entire sample, were even willing to go so far as to say that recent global warming was mostly man-made. That was the consensus proposition, not that it was going to be dangerous. That question wasn't even asked. So there is no scientific consensus. No, there is. I'm going to give in on this. Because it is we in this room who are and ever have been the climate science mainstream. Mr. Obama, lurking as usual behind closed doors in that dark place where the sun don't shine, has been furtively negotiating behind the backs of the people a transatlantic trade treaty of whose details far too little has yet been revealed to us, or even to your elected representatives. We know really only two things for sure. The treaty will bind all of its signatories irreversibly to take costly and unnecessary action to address the non-problem of global warming, and as with Obamacare, the contents of the bill enacting it will not be revealed to members of Congress until after they have voted on it. Whatever that is, ladies and gentlemen, it is not the democracy that your founding fathers had in mind. Such is the contempt for democracy on the part of the totalitarians who dare to call themselves the Democrats. It is the duty of the Republican Party not to be fooled by the artificial rhetoric of free trade into enacting the reality of yet another supranational and unelected governing body with real political power that is intended to be forever beyond the reach or recall of any mere electorate. For today's totalitarians have learnt that there's no need for jackboots. All they need to ensure the permanent imposition of their will upon every aspect of our lives, down to the last flickering, poison-filled mercury light bulb, is a treaty, the one sure method by which an administration in temporary control of the White House and likely to lose it can inflict a permanent and irreversible law upon all its successors beyond any hope of subsequent reversal, notwithstanding the changing wishes of the people or the votes of the Congress of their elected representatives. The treaty-making power is increasingly being used by the Marxist left worldwide to bind irrevocably the elected parliaments, and therefore to breach the fundamental principle of an elected parliament, which is that it cannot bind its successors. Now, it's the duty, therefore, of the Republican Party to insert not only into the Transatlantic Trade Treaty, but also and separately into the Treaty of Paris, a short, simple secession clause that permits any state party to the treaty to resile from any of its obligations thereunder without penalty after giving a year or two's notice to the depository state. Here you will see a secession clause that was indeed inserted into the Kyoto Protocol. You need, at the moment, neither in the trade treaty as far as we can tell, we haven't seen it yet, but certainly not in the Paris Treaty, whose draft I have read, there is no secession clause. It is the most urgent matter that faces all of us now to make sure that that secession clause is inserted. Because once it is there, the global governing body that has the ambition to turn itself as rapidly as possible into an unelected, permanent and all-powerful global government will know that as soon as it becomes apparent to all as it is apparent to us that there is no basis for global warming alarm, then countries one by one can leave at once and without penalty. Now, as the mood music gathers and becomes more rapid and more insistent, even His Holiness the Pope has been drawn into the pre-Paris schmooze fest. The most widely publicized encyclical letter of all time will be published next week, and here I exclusively reveal its entire contents. As far as the world is concerned, the Pope comes to the party far too late. Most governments have long since made up their mind that they will sign whatever is put in front of them in Paris rather than being screeched at by the Marxists. It is sad that by this kind of institutional terrorism, rational decision-making has been replaced by fear, but it has. And I have recently been reading Richards' 3-volume History of the Third Reich. The first volume is in many ways the most interesting of the three. It describes how the Third Reich came to be. Many of the signals of impending totalitarian disaster that are evident in the behavior of the hard left today are the same signals that were being given by the Nazi hard left, for they are left. They were the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany at the time when they were calling for their opponents before they reached power. They were calling for their opponents to be arrested and tried and executed for not following the Nazi party line. And we have heard almost every week in recent years somebody, often senior professors, demanding that we be arrested, tried, and not merely imprisoned, but executed for not adhering to the party line. You would have thought that after the unspeakable horrors of the 20th century, even the hard left of today would not be so unprincipled and so careless of history as to repeat that hideous and murderous mistake. At the preparatory meeting of the Pontifical Academies of Sciences and of Social Sciences in the Vatican Gardens a few weeks ago, I was the only climate skeptic to sit in the main hall. I got in when they weren't looking. Scarce 2 yards from me, sound asleep, sat Dr. Joachim Schellnhuber of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Studies. All that need be said of that institute is that I have never yet seen it produce a single honest paper about climate. The Vatican has alas announced that Dr. Schellnhuber will be alongside the Pope at the launch of the encyclical next week. That is unwelcome news. 6 years ago, at the Copenhagen meeting that failed to establish what the draft treaty went so far as to call a government, Dr. Schellnhuber, citing his own research, said that at certain tipping points, higher temperatures could cause areas of the ocean to become deoxygenated, resulting in oxygen holes 6,000 to 2,500 feet deep, disrupting the food chain. For good measure, unabated warming would also lead to disruption of the monsoon, collapse of the Amazon rainforest, and the Greenland ice sheet will melt down, increasing Denmark's usable land by, I don't know, 10,000%. After all, Dr. Schellnhuber dishonestly predicted that global warming would kill 6 billion people and reduce the world's population to 1 billion. That was the claim he made at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. This is the man, ladies and gentlemen, to whom His Holiness the Pope has unwisely listened most closely on climate change. Your Holiness, your predecessor, Pope Urban VIII, placed Galileo under house arrest, but Galileo was right and the Church wrong on science. Do not for a second time make the unwise mistake of following mere fashion and expediency by according to man a centrality in the behavior of our solar system that properly belongs to the celestial body from which it takes its name and which constitutes 99.9% of its mass. The respectful advice of the eminent scientists and researchers at this conference, therefore, is this. 1, stay your hand. Do we agree with that? Yeah. 2, hear both sides, as the Pontifical Academies culpably and to their eternal shame did not. Do we agree with that? 3, put aside Schellnhuber and his inhuman nonsense. Do we agree with that? 4, think again. Do we agree with that? Another piece of pre-Paris mood music, which would unquestionably be marked scherzando, was the publication in the propaganda sheet Science, once a learned journal, I understand, of a paper by Tom Carl, the hapless director of the National Climatic Data Center, announcing that the stasis hiatus or pause or hernia in global warming that was first announced to the Doha Climate Conference by a certain party does not exist, and that the Earth's surface has carried on warming at an accelerating rate. Well, now, neither the authors of this nonsensical paper, nor the PAL reviewers, nor the propagandists who edit the once learned journal Science had bothered to check the rates at which the air immediately above the surface and the ocean immediately below it had warmed. The air above it hadn't warmed, the ocean below it had hardly warmed. There's no way that the interface between them could have warmed. That would repeal the laws of science. Now, we have had a lot about Willie Soon today and Harvard, which has behaved so badly towards him and so very favorably towards somebody who really did have a much bigger conflict of interest. And so at an earlier presentation, I did say that we should redo the Harvard logo and that there's now a new Harvard cheerleaders song. Lie, 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 lie. Now, I'm pleased to report that Congressman Smith is on that case. I'm delighted that Willie and his 2 charming children, as well as his wife, have been with us at the conference. I want you once again to rise to your feet and make the loudest noise you can to indicate your affection, loyalty, support for Willie and his family and their great courage at this very difficult time. And finally, within 2 years, there will have been 20 years without global warming. That as the IPCC scientist Dr. Isaac Held has recently said, will mark the end of the dominance of the failed computer models and thus, as we should put it, the end of the climate scare. But I end now with the simple but heartfelt prayer of the good and holy man who founded the Society of Jesus. Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Amen.
I really need to cultivate a British accent.